Alrighty, hello and welcome to round 6 of this PPTQ for KYOTO here at General Games. I'm Paul Mitchell, sitting next to me, Nathan.
Hey, how's it going?
And we're underway here. We've got Chifley on Jund Energy facing off against Yi on Mardu Ballista. Looks
Yep.
like Chifley was on the play, had a first turn attune with Aether to go and get a swamp. And now we've got a Thraben Inspector for Yi. So, Nathan, how do you see this matchup playing out most of the time?
So I think the traditional wisdom has been that green-black has a pretty good Mardu matchup. Uh, I've typically found it to be pretty close, actually.
Oh, yeah?
The addition of Unlicensed Disintegration, which is the card that Chifley's playing red for, is an interesting one. I'm not sure how it fares so much in the matchup. As a primarily Mardu vehicles player, Paul, how do you feel about facing down green-black with Unlicensed Disintegration?
So Unlicensed Disintegration is obviously a good card, and if Chifley can come out to a strong, aggressive start and back that up with an Unlicensed Disintegration, that'll be really strong. But if he's got a bit of a slow draw, then it can just be another murder. Here we see a Greenbelt Rampager on turn 2, so we may see more of an explosive start. Can you see much of what's in Chifley's hand?
Not yet. He's holding it a little out of shot, unfortunately.
Alright, so he'll be keeping us informed. Here we go.
Yep. Yep. So you can see another Greenbelt Rampager and a couple of Scrap Heap Scroungers. So not particularly powerful hand, but some good efficient creatures.
Yeah, definitely slanted aggressive as well with those Scroungers that can't block. And here we see a Scrounger for Yi as well.
Yeah.
But obviously can't attack into that Greenbelt Rampager, so he's just going to shoot the turn.
Yep. Greenbelt Rampager doing some good work here.
Ooh, here we go.
I do know that Yi has a Fatal Push in his hand. So now that he's got the black off the Spire of Industry, that it's going to let him pick off one of these slightly larger two drops or one drops, as the case may be.
Oh, here we go. Deploying 6 power on the second turn here.
Yeah, Chifley is off to a pretty explosive start here. It's nice that the Rampager is also just a giant creature to block with, in addition to being a good attacker. That's the sort of thing that you really want against a deck like Mardu.
Yeah, 3/4 is pretty massive on boards like this, and we see one Fatal Push in Yi's hand, which is fantastic at dealing with this elephant. And it looks like there's also a Unlicensed Disintegration and Heart of Kieran and a couple of other cards I can't quite make out.
Yeah, so Yi's hand is more powerful than what Chifley has at the moment, but the downside is that it's a lot clunkier. That Unlicensed Disintegration is going to take a full turn to cast. The Heart of Kieran would be quite good with the Scrap Heap Scrounger, actually, both on offense or defense. So I'm not sure what Yi has elected to leave up instead of.
It looks like this will be the Fatal Push coming in.
Okay, that's interesting. How do you feel about that play, leaving up the 2 mana to cast Fatal Push?
I can see it going really wrong if Chifley has Blossoming Defense.
Yep.
And I think if you know that you're going to be locked into Fatal Pushing one of the elephants, you might as well just do it on your turn. It's not going to change his attacks.
Okay.
So a Blossoming Defense there would have been pretty devastating, but we can see due to the deck list that Chifley does not have that card, so.
Yeah, I imagine the Unlicensed Disintegration sort of taking up the same sort of slot.
Yeah, you can't necessarily have that many spell slots, so Chifley deploying a second Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Yep.
We'll probably see Yi attack with his this turn. He wasn't able to last time with the Greenbelt Rampager.
Yep.
But we'll see Yi definitely on the back foot here. Or he could even use, if he looks like he's going for the Heart of Kieran, he can use the Scrap Heap Scrounger to help block some of Chifley's monsters that'll be coming through.
Yeah, I think I like that play. It means that none of Chifley's creatures can attack profitably, though I'm sure the Scrap Heap Scroungers will anyway, because it's not hard for Chifley to buy them back, especially if he's still light on action.
And we'll probably see Thraben Inspector on chump duty here as well.
Yeah, it'll depend on how aggressive an attack Chifley makes, I think.
Well, he does have the Unlicensed Disintegration in hand now.
That is going to be really big. Although
now,
he actually doesn't have energy.
No energy. So he's only got Swamp. He'd need Mountain, or he'd need Red Mana off the Aether Hub, and without energy, you're totally right. And Yi has actually found a second copy of Fatal Push, so that'll help stem the bleeding as well. But we'll see. Chifley's going to be looking at that untapped Smoldering Marsh, and Fatal Push will be the card that comes to mind for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Yi already had the Fatal Push, but there is a bit of a tell in the way, the fact that Yi has 2 turns in a row played off curve. Last turn he elected to leave up the Fatal Push, and then, unless he drew the Heart of Kieran, suggests that he has a reason for doing that. So I'm sure Chifley's keenly aware of the fact that the Fatal Push is there. That might make him be more hesitant about making this play. Yeah, but I guess not.
Yeah, I guess he figures he doesn't have a lot of action in hand. Ye's missing land drops, which means his hand's full of spells.
Yep.
But this is going to play into Ye's hands, who just kind of needs to buy time and block and use some of his mana and removal spells. And it looks like he's even got a second copy of Heart of Kieran in hand, so if something went wrong in this combat and the heart dies, he's got a backup one in hand.
Yep. And this still isn't disastrous for Chifley because he drew a Walking Ballista. It means he can pick off the Heart of Kieran, and he still can get back that Scrap Heap Scrounger later. He is very much working in a situation where he doesn't have a lot of resources available, so having things like a mana sink in the Scrap Heap Scroungers and the Walking Ballista is going to go a long way to help him keep
and the
up
hissing Quagmire, but that's a pretty nasty one to get Fatal Pushed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even with all of that, and with Chifley having Yi down to 7, he's going to really want to be closing the game out within the next couple of turns, because once he gets to deploy the rest of his hand, it's just got a lot more power in it than Chifley.
Yeah, I think looking at Chifley's list here, he's opted for a much more aggressive build with the Greenbelt Rampages. He does have 3 Tireless Trackers and 2 Verdurous Gearhulk to kind of top out his curve, so those are the kinds of spells he'd be looking to draw off the top in this situation. But Yi's hand is still full of action. It's just a matter of how he wants to sequence this and deploy his hand.
He has so far managed to sequence his lands in possibly the most awkward way possible. Well, every land coming into play tapped.
The Smoldering Marsh doesn't make things easy. I think it's probably the worst land in the deck. You very rarely have a swamp or a mountain to reveal to it, so it is basically Rakdos Guildgate. But it looks like we're lining up an Unlicensed Disintegration. He's not really interested in getting in a lot of damage here because he is kind of on the defense, so he doesn't mind using it on the Ballista before Chifley untaps to sink some mana in and get in for 2 damage. Doing it on his main phase now means it's going to hit him for 1, so he's not going to take so much damage, and missing out on the 3 damage because it gets counted on resolution isn't a big deal because he's on the back foot here.
But this is a very precarious position that Yi is in, right? Like if Chifley draws a red source, the game ends immediately.
Yep.
Chifley can still just put Yi to 3 by just activating that Quagmire and attacking, which means that Unlicensed Disintegration with the Scrap Heap Scroungers is basically going to be lethal for the rest of the game.
Yeah, any red source or any Ballista, once he gets to 6 mana, is going to be lethal on 3, so it's a very dangerous number to be on.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll see Chifley hold his Rishkar in hand this turn just to get in that point of damage and put Yi in a tough spot.
Yeah, that will be interesting. Okay, but it looks like that's not the case. So I imagine Chifley's play here is going to be to buy back a Scrounger and then play the Rishkard, give them both +1/+1 counter.
Yeah, I figure if that was your play where you wouldn't... if your plan is to bring back the Scrounger and go for Rishkar, would you want to do that pre-combat to potentially get in for another damage? Or do you think Yi's just always going to chump block here, so you might as well do it on the other one?
So I think the reason not to is that the difference between Yi being on 2 and Yi being on 1 doesn't matter too much.
Sure.
He's slightly less likely to block, and it also just conceals a lot of information.
Oh, so we're going both on the Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Okay, that's interesting. It does... I guess, it doesn't really matter too much. Like, Rishkar at 2 power is lethal.
Yep.
Now the Scroungers can tap for mana, whereas Rishkar is able to block if Chifley has need for that. Ultimately, though, the key thing is Chifley now has access to 4 lethal threats.
Yep.
Plus an Unlicensed Disintegration in his hand, which at some point he'll be able to cast.
Yeah, so any creature here is just going to increase the pressure, and he's possibly not even able to hang on to this turn. So yeah, Chifley's got a lot of live draws and a pretty lethal board, so I'm not sure if you can get out of this one. It may involve playing a Ballista, assigning as a blocker, and then shooting the Rishkar. But even then, the Scrounger can't block, the Thraben Inspector's going to chump, and he's still got another creature to deal with there.
Yeah, I like the way Chifley's played this game to really make the most of...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's...
So he's just decided nothing in his hand gets it done. I'm not sure anything in his deck gets it done, but we might as well take a look, just in case he's got balance in the list somewhere.
Yeah, you know, balance isn't even that good when one of your creatures can't block.
That's true. So we'll just see an attack here, and likely Chifley will move all in next turn, and that'll be game.
Yep. Yep, so you trying to pass the turn as quickly as possible. I hope Chifley misses something, but Chifley is has lethal without even activating his. Yep, and
Yeah,
there he goes.
he'll do it
Very
anyway.
quickly going through the motions. Okay, so game one to the Jund energy deck. After sideboard, how do you feel about this matchup?
I think it changes drastically in favor of the Mardu deck.
Okay.
I think the conventional wisdom that's prevailed for the last, month or two, or however long these major archetypes have been lining up against each other, that black-green has been generally favored against the Mardu deck. But I think the Mardu deck in general has found a strong sideboard plan to come out against the black-green, or in this case, Jund type decks, and the black-green decks have really struggled to kind of have that counterplay against that sideboard plan. So we see in Yi's sideboard here, we've got an extra copy of Fatal Push, which is fantastic against all the rampages. We've got giant things like Nahiri and Obnixilis, which are likely going to come in, even a Oath of Liliana, Stasis Snare, and if he really wants to just transform entirely into a control deck, he even has copies of Painful Truths, Anguished Unmaking, to use his life as a resource and just switch to being a fully control deck. So that's something for him to consider, how much of a switch he wants to do. And also Chifley's going to be thinking about how he's going to react, potentially anticipating how Yi will position himself.
So do you think from Chifley's side of the board, should he be trying to be more aggressive to anticipate that sort of change?
That's
or should he try and outgrind this Planeswalker plane?
It's going to be tough on the draw to try and go with the aggro plan. But that being said, your Green Pelt Rampages are still great. Your Winding Constrictors are still great. I think maybe the Long Tusk Cubs are something he's looking to take out. And if he wants to go a bit bigger, he could go Gonti or Transgress the Mind even to answer some of Yi's Planeswalkers. And if he wants to go aggressive, he's got 4 copies of Glint-Sleeve Siphoner in the sideboard, as well as 2 Lathnu Hellion. But I'd be surprised if we go in that direction.
Yeah, Lathnu Hellion's an interesting one. I haven't really seen too much of that in Standard.
No, it's just kind of get you.
Yeah.
If your opponent's got a lot of Planeswalkers and not much of a board, then I can see it coming in and getting the job done. Or even against a pretty linear combo deck like Aetherwurst Marl, you might want to just have a giant 4/4 haste guy to close the game out before they get to combo you. But in this matchup where Yi's going to have a lot of Toolcraft, or rather Thraben Expectors lying around, or Gideon tokens lying around, I don't see Lathnu Hellion being super effective. So we'll see how Chifley decides to take it. He'll probably go a little bit bigger, but that kind of back and forth is what's really interesting about this matchup.
Yeah, I know that it used to be a strategy for some time for the Mardu decks to actually play sweepers in their board, like End Hostilities.
Fumigate,
Fumigate, sorry. Is that the sort of sideboard plan that Chifley you think will be considering?
It's certainly going to be in his mind. These players don't have deck lists, so he'll have to try and predict that. And maybe that's another reason for him to bring in Transgress the Mind.
Yep.
So Transgress the Mind doesn't seem like it might be a good card when you bring it in against the Toolcraft Exemplar deck. But if you're trying to second guess whether Yi's going on the Planeswalker plan or the Fumigate plan or any number of large, powerful trump cards that you will likely be siding into, Transgress kind of catches them all. So that might be even another option that he's considering.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's quite a lot of back and forth in this kind of matchup. I do think that's the kind of thing that, if you are a fan of this standard, I think that's one of the main reasons you are, is because Black-Green, Mardu Ballista, and Saheeli all have access to pretty dynamic sideboarding plans.
Yeah, in terms of these two decks, they could both, in a post-board game, become very aggressive or very controlling. And while the Saheeli deck doesn't have the option of becoming an aggro deck, it can also be a control deck, but a combo deck.
Yeah.
So all of these decks have transformative sideboards back and forth. You might want to change, if these two players met in the finals, which won't happen today, but you could play against someone in the Swiss where they have one plan and you remember back, I played them earlier today and they did blah, blah, blah. They could just change it entirely just to keep you off balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a lot of back and forth, and if this matchup does go to Game 3, we'll likely see another major shift.
Yeah, I would imagine being on the play or draw would very much change how aggressive you want to be and what sort of answers you want in your deck.
All right, here we go. So Yi will be on the play. He's got a Gideon, looks like plenty of lands, and an Avacyn, and a turn 1 plane in Thraben Inspector, so I'll expect him to keep this.
Chifley's hand, on the other hand, looks quite good as well. He's got the turn 2 Scrounger into Orishka, And then he has a copy of Unlicensed Disintegration. Once again, lacking the mana to cast it, though. Interesting. He is actually shipped his.
Well, I'm surprised by that, because I think having a turn 1 play in Thraben Inspector, and then without a turn 2 play, you can always just crack the Clue, and then 2 of your big cards in Gideon and Avacyn. We didn't get a great look at his hand. Maybe he only had the 2 Concealed Courtyards.
Yeah.
But I'd be tempted to keep that regardless, because you are able to cycle through that Clue on turn 2.
Yeah, interesting. I guess it might be that he's fearing a more aggressive start from Chifley, where, like last game, for instance, Chifley curved out quite aggressively.
True.
And that sort of hand would be vulnerable to that sort of opening. I'm with you. I don't think I would have shipped that one, but I can see the motivation for it.
So let's see if he gets a more interactive hand here. We've got an Unlicensed Disintegration. Looks like a Scrounger. And I think that's a Thraben Inspectors, 2 from the back. So this is that curve of creature removal spells. So we're even looking at another Unlicensed Disintegration on the top. So I think, based on Yi's hand, we could see a very aggressive start from here and a complete reversal of what happened in game 1.
Yeah. Chifley's draw was attuned for Aether, which is actually quite good because it unlocks the Unlicensed Disintegration.
There we go.
Assuming he has access to a basic mountain in his deck, which he does, yes. Excellent.
I'd be surprised if the Attune with Aether deck didn't have a mountain.
Access to it, you're just hoping to get there.
He just kind of slams his fist on the table. What was I thinking?
So that will unlock that, which means Chifley's hand is also quite powerful now.
Yeah, but in the so this is, if their turn 2 plays are very similar in Scrounger, and then they both have Unlicensed Disintegrations, I think, it stands to reason that whoever's on the play will come out ahead in that spot.
Yep.
Especially when the creatures can't block and you're getting punished for playing creatures and having your opponent untap. So
yeah, the only advantage that Chifley has in this really is that he has access to Rishka. So if Yi doesn't cast the Unlicensed Disintegration this turn, then it will mean that Rishka will enable Chifley to have some slightly bigger creatures.
Yep.
The Yi's also pretty safe in just holding up the Disintegration if he really wants.
Yeah, it looks like he has 2 Disintegrations and a land. Is that what we're seeing here? No, it's a Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Okay.
Oh wow, so a very aggressive start here. He can just tap out the next 2 turns for Unlicensed Disintegration, and in my experience, that's usually good enough. If your opponent's just playing creatures on curve, you already have a strong board presence, and you're just blasting away. And the impressive thing here is the Scrounger can't block ever. Yep. So even if Chifley has this Rishka back to block, Chifley's not in a position essentially where he can leave both creatures back to block. Yep. So you can take out his entire defensive force and swing for a total of 10 this turn, it seems.
Yeah, it's going to be very hard for Chifley to come back from a second Unlicensed Disintegration as well. Like, he would need to deploy multiple creatures, and then one of them would get disintegrated, and then he would still need to have enough blockers left over. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think Scrounger is one of those cards that either player could side in or out, depending on how they see themselves. So it's interesting to see them both have Scrap Heap Scrounger in their deck and have this uninteractive just race where the game's going to end on turn 5. I wonder if that will influence their sideboarding decisions.
Well, one thing that is very important, particularly for the black-green deck, is Rishka desperately needs a 2-drop.
Yep.
If you don't have a 2-drop, Rishka goes from being one of your best cards to one of your worst. So I can see Chifley just saying, look, this isn't the 2-drop I want, but I just really need a 2-drop.
Yeah, and it could also be that he's shaved several copies of the Scrap Heap Scrounger. He's got 4 in the main deck. Maybe you just go down to 1 because you think, I want access to this effect, but it's not the best, and he just happened to draw it this time. So
yeah, absolutely. And there's not going to be a way of knowing that unless he draws 3 and somehow survives 3 turns to do so.
So Chifley's going to think here about how he could possibly survive if Yi does not have Unlicensed Disintegration.
Yep.
And I think when you're this far behind, you're kind of forced to just say, well, if they have it, there's nothing I could have done.
Yeah.
But what he's decided here, it seems, is rather than playing a blocker that just does get destroyed by removal, he's going to play his own Unlicensed Disintegration on Scrounger, but that's going to open the way up for Yi to cast his own Unlicensed Disintegration and finish Chifley off. So we're going to go to game 3.
Yep, nice quick game. It is interesting to note that after that sort of discussion about the larger version of Maru post sideboard, that Yi's draw ended up being 1-drop, 2-drop, 2-drop, removal spell.
Yep. That is how a lot of pre-board games go. And yeah, to have it go through in the post-board games play out like that with multiple Scroungers, Can you make out what Yi's taking out here?
I didn't quite catch
He's
that.
looking at Heart of Kieran. So he took out at least one. I wonder if that's the playset in front of him now.
Interesting. That is, one of the cards that makes made it Mardu vehicles. This is much more so the.
Wow. Okay. So he's got Nihiri's coming in. He's got Anguished Unmaking coming in. He's looking at what was that one? It's hard to tell, but it looks like he is going a little bigger. He's taking out his Heart of Kieran's. Maybe he's identified that that's a weaker card on the draw.
Yeah, so we saw he cut. It looks like he cut one for game 2.
Yep.
We can see one. We can see one in his sideboard there, and then for game 3, it looks like he's settling into the defensive plan.
A card that's always on my mind when my opponent is playing Mountain is Release the Gremlins.
Yep.
But with Chifley being more of an aggressive deck and not having access to a lot of Mountains reliably, we know that he doesn't have it in his deck list, but I wonder if that's a card that Yi is thinking about.
That's true, and it is a pretty big advantage to be able to have your opponent bring in a card like Release the Gremlins, and then you have taken out all your targets.
Yeah, and the only targets are like Scrounger and Ballista, which are medium at best.
Very good, yeah. So we got 30 minutes for game 3. Blaze through that game too.
Yeah, this has been pretty aggressive, and even with both players trying to predetermine how the game will go, depending on the kinds of hands you draw, we could have another race like game 2, or we could have a ground out game where players are playing Planeswalkers and Gontis, and we'll just have to strap in and see what happens.
We have seen Gonti cast on camera already this event. It's been quite exciting so far.
I've seen Gonti cast in Vintage, which was quite a treat.
Was it good?
It was not.
Okay.
Yeah, LSV was streaming last week, and his empty-handed opponent says, well, the last card in my hand is Vampiric Tutor. Vampiric, and LSV says, oh, he's probably going to go and get an Ancestral Recall or something. Untap, Gonti.
Wow.
So, I mean, Vintage Powerhouse Gonti,
I guess you get to say that now.
Exactly. So we'll see if Chifley's packing that one.
Okay, so with Chifley on the play and having a little bit of a glimpse of the sideboarding plan, who do you think is going to be favored in this game 3?
I think this isn't the most play-draw dependent matchup, but it's still important. So I think if anyone has an edge, it's Chifley.
Yep.
But it's always going to be contextual, and we could see players keep slower hands, faster hands, and we'll see how they interact with each other. Looks like Chifley has turn 2 Ballista into turn 3 Rishkar, which seems good enough to keep.
Yep. He's even got the Dream Curve of following up with a Verdurous Gearhulk.
Yeah, that's going to be a turn 4 Gearhulk thanks to Rishkar's mana-producing ability. Yi has a pretty sketchy hand. It looks like his Spire of Industry might be his only land, or maybe one of 2 lands. So he's going to have to ship that one back.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for him. The double Fatal Push opener, well, at least the first Fatal Push would have gone a long way to mitigating the impact of Rishkar allowing the Verdurous Gearhulk setup, but with only a waste to cast your 3 color spells, it's not going to be quite good enough. Yeah,
when the mana works in the Mardu Ballista deck, it's pretty amazing. You get just access to a mana confluence type land in Spire of Industry, but when it doesn't work, it's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah,
So we'll see this one with Gideon. It looks like a Spire of Industry of Plains, an Aether Hub. He's got an Unlicensed Disintegration on what looks like a Ballista. So this looks like a turn 2 Ballista into turn 3 removal spell in Gideon. And we'll see if he's looking at a shock that he's scrying at the top. He's going to be on the draw. So here's another decision of whether he thinks Chifley's going to be an aggressive deck or not. Because if he anticipates that Chifley's going to have an aggressive turn 2 play, he might want to keep that shock.
Yeah.
As it is, he shipped it to the bottom and drew a Scrounger instead.
Yeah, and I think Scrounger is going to be a surprisingly good draw here. Even though it's going to mean he's going to take a lot of damage. Chifley also chose Scrounger.
Oh, wow. That's a better turn 2 play than the Ballista, which is a little unimpressive as a 2-mana 1/1.
Okay, yeah. So that works out quite well then for Chifley. So Chifley's just got the Dream Curve, really. I mean, the Scrounger could be a Winding Constrictor, but he's still going to be able to smash before this next turn, and then the turn after that have the Verdurous Gearhulk, which is going to...
Yeah, he's going to have 7 power on the board on turn 3, and then... 15 if everything goes right?
Some infinitely large number of power.
So we'll see if Yi's removal can keep up with this. Looks like he's got 1 Unlicensed Disintegration, so that'll come down maybe the turn the Verdurous Gearhulk comes down. So we'll see how Chifley decides to First of all, plan his next turn, and secondly, distribute counters if he does go with the Gearhulk. But Yi is in a position here where maybe he's under too much pressure and he wants to play out a blocker, but seeing as the only creature in his hand that looks like could block would be the Thraben Inspector, he's likely just going to leave up Unlicensed Disintegration here.
Do you think it would be worthwhile? Like, we know that Chifley has the Gearhulk, so we know that the Unlicensed Disintegration would work out best if it's cast right now. Do you think that's going to be on Yi's mind as well?
I don't think he's seen Blossoming Defense yet, and it looked like he wasn't playing around it in game 1. And that's the card that I always think of when wondering about if I'm going to get punished for waiting till my opponent's next turn. So given that Gearhulk is something to come down, then I believe he's likely to pass here. But he's also hasn't seen a Gearhulk yet this match.
Well, I think Yi's thinking might be that if he kills a Risker, it takes Chifley off 1 more mana.
That's true.
Which buys 1 more turn before the Gearhulk can come down. And maybe that's just what Yi needs to
absolutely
win this game.
And we'll see what Chifley draws this turn, because I don't think he has a good 4-drop currently.
Well, the Ballista that he had...
Oh, he had the Ballista, yeah, that's right.
Gonna do a serviceable job.
Yep. Yeah, he drew the Scrounger, so the Ballista's still in his hand. Looks like he's got a Rampager, but that Ballista is going to be a better on-curve for turn 4 here.
One thing I really like about the way Chifley's hand is set up is that he still has a lot of power, but this 4-power Scrounger is going to be able to serve, at least 1 more time.
Yeah, and turn 4 for the Mardu Ballista deck is, Gideon is usually one of the better plays you can make, and making a 2/2 blocker is usually, decent when you're getting beaten down, but having a 4/3 Scrounger means it can blast through that and not trade off in combat.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like Yi's hand is a little bit weak here. I'm not seeing a great sequence this turn.
Yeah, we could see a similar thing where he plays the Inspector and leads up Unlicensed Disintegration. But I still find it interesting that, once again in Game 3, we've got a Scrap Heap Scrounger mirror, and it seems that whoever's been on the play has been at least somewhat favoured in the Scrounger mirror.
Yep.
So, I wonder if these players gave any consideration to play or draw with keeping in Scrounger, or maybe you just think it's such a good value card, it's a high impact card, and can maybe help you if the game goes long, you bring it back a couple of times, or if the chips fall your way, you could be the aggressor. But it is interesting that we've seen Scrap Heap Scrounger on both sides of the table in both post-board games. Maybe my prediction of them going bigger was just totally off.
Just the ships passing in the night.
Yeah, exactly.
Past each other until the end of time.
Whoever gets the first 3 in is usually favoured.
Okay, so it looks like Yi's tapping down pretty low. Does he have a Fatal Push or Shock in his hand?
I know he scryed 1 to the bottom.
He's just playing out his hand.
He's just playing out 3 creatures.
So this turn's not going to be very good for Yi. That Gearhulk is going to come down, and there's a Walking Ballista waiting to receive counters. So that's going to...
Yeah, it looks like this Gearhulk coming down here, if all the counters go on the Walking Ballista, it'll become a 6/6. I don't know if Chifley's interested in spending 4 +1/+1 counters to take out two Thraben Inspectors, rather.
Yep.
Do we know if Chifley has an untapped land? I feel like he does.
I thought I saw one earlier, but it's possible that was his land last turn. The fact that he's thinking this much may indicate that he doesn't, but I know there's other options as well that he has access to, such as the Unlicensed Disintegration.
Well, it also for sure, he'd be thinking about how he'd want to distribute his +1/+1 counters before he even puts his Gearhulk on the stack. So maybe he's just thinking about how he might distribute them best to utilize the Ballista's ability to get in for damage before he even casts it, to know if that would be a good play in advance. But it looks like he's content just to ascend here. The obvious double block is 2 Thraben Inspectors on the 2/2 Ballista, but representing 4 mana means he would be able to pump out of that. Wouldn't even be a bad case for you. It would be chumping with the Thraben Inspector and then using up 4 of Chifley's mana. So we'll see if he goes for the double block on Ballista.
Yeah, I think, especially since Yi is relatively has been playing from behind pretty much his whole game.
Yep.
Forcing Chifley to basically time walk himself to not really add too much to the board, I think is something he might be interested in.
Yeah, we know Yi has Unlicensed Disintegration in his hand. Is that correct?
I know he played one earlier. I'm not sure if he still does. Chifley does have an Unlicensed Disintegration, which would mean that if Yi did take that double block, Chifley would have the unexciting option of firing that off to kill.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because if he does, or if he's thinking about top decking one, he would have exactly lethal between 6 from the Scroungers, 2 from the Thraben Inspectors, and then 3 from the Unlicensed Disintegration. So there is a world in which Yi could crack back for exactly lethal next turn if everything goes his way, which would lead him to not block at all.
Yep.
Which it's a bit of a risky proposition. And with 2 clues in play, he might be interested in playing a bit of a slower game. So it seems like he's decided that's not worth it, and I hope he's not thinking about lining up a block with that Scrounger.
I'm sure that's not on his mind at all. That's interesting. I'm sure Chifley, though, would be aware that that would be an option available to him as well.
To break up that Xaxes damage next turn, Chifley would have to play any creature or any removal spell. So it's very unlikely that Yi can put him on a hand where that works. As it stands, it looks like he's got 2 Unlicensed Disintegration, a Greenbelt Rampager, and a Verdurous Gearhulk. So lots of damage to punch in with.
Right. Okay, so he doesn't have the 5th land for the Gearhulk. That makes sense.
No. And he's going to fire this off on a lowly 1/2 Thraben Inspector just to make sure his Ballista doesn't die.
Yep.
This also means he's getting in for 3 damage without spending 4 mana on the pump ability from the Ballista. He's going to take 4 from the Scrap Heap Scrounger, and we'll likely see Chifley follow up with a Rampager off that last forest.
Yep, so this leaves Chifley in pretty great position here. He's got the mana to cast an Unlicensed Disintegration, he's got a 2/2 Ballista in play, he's got access to a lot of reach.
Yep.
He is vulnerable this turn, but the Mardu deck doesn't really have a way to deal an extra 5 damage out of nowhere anymore.
No, it doesn't have Fleetwheel Cruiser. Yi's already used an Unlicensed Disintegration. And once again, his Scroungers can't block, so they're forced to go and be attacking here, which means Yi's dead to the board. And if he has removal, he might want to leave it up for the Ballista so he doesn't get taken out. Because 4 counters on the Ballista would be more than enough to kill him from this position. But Chifley failed to play his 5th land last turn, so maybe he can try and fade one more turn and play in such a way where he beats not Gearhulk.
Maybe, yeah. Chifley definitely has play to his hand here, in the sense that his hand already leaves Yi dead in a couple of different ways. Like, Yi can certainly get out of the situation, but he has so many draws, including an untapped land, that is going to just be completely backbreaking for Yi.
Yeah, neither of the creatures in play on Chifley's side currently have Trample, but Ballista going straight to the face kind of forgoes the need to get into combat at all.
Absolutely.
So if Yi taps out this turn and Chifley draws his 5th land, that'll be game over right on the spot.
Yeah, and we see Yi cracking a clue, which again indicates that he probably doesn't have access to the tools he needs.
Well, it looks like he's found a Fatal Push.
Okay.
So he still has no choice but to attack with the Scroungers. They're going to be useless on defense. Might as well get him in there. He's going to play a tapped land. He's going to... If Chifley goes for Gearhulk on the Ballista, Yi can Fatal Push it in response. But in this position, Chifley could just send his creatures sideways and say, look, these are lethal. Yeah. You have to deal with this now, regardless of any Gearhulk shenanigans, which it looks like he's going to do exactly that.
Yeah, both creatures are lethal here. Because once the Ballista connects, Chifley can just take off the 2 counters.
Yep. Yi would have to have a second Fatal Push here.
Yep, and looks like that's it. So Chifley wins the game, wins the match.
Yep.
And most likely we'll be seeing him in the top 8.
Yeah, I'd be surprised. And yeah, interesting that we saw both players there stick to their aggressive roots, and we saw a lot of Scrounger mirrors. And yeah, that'll do it for round 6.
Cool. See you in the finals.